Well, good morning, Jagendra Rana here. Big food decides what you eat. That is the topic of our discussion today. Big food decides what you eat. Virtual capture of policy processes by large processed food firms, with many decisions contradicted by public health concerns, has parallels with the playback once used by Big Tobacco. When the Lancet released its global three-part series of ultra-processed food and human health in November, the reaction from the world's largest food corporations was immediate, coordinated, and revealing. International Food and Beverage Alliance, representing major multinational UPF manufacturers, asserted its members want to improve global health outcomes through diet quality and that food companies should be part of policy making. So its Secretary General added that Lancet series policy recommendations go far beyond the available evidence. Now this response must be recognized for what it is, a declaration of intent to preserve corporate influence over food regulations when scientific evidence demands the opposite. So the contradiction is stark. The same corporations whose profits depends on expanding UPF market, whose products displays real food, degrade diet quality, and increase risk of obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, depression, and premature mortality, now present themselves as guardians of global health. So the comparison with the playback once used by the tobacco industry is inescapable. The Lancet series warns unequivocally that the food industry interference is the single largest barrier to reducing UPF consumption worldwide. India, now one of the world's fastest growing UPF markets, cannot afford to accept such narrative critically. It's not customer choice. Commercial determines Commercial determinants are globally shaping modern diets. A central insight of the Lancet series is the UPFs are not just unhealthy products, but the output of a profit driven food economy that proactively displaces mainly or minimally processed and traditional foods. That shift is not driven by consumer preferences or convenience. Profit driven food environments are created that maximize product penetration, frequency of use, and ensure overconsumption. So, eight multinational companies dominate the global UPF landscape. The business model relies on ultra cheap raw ingredients, cosmetic additives that mimic flavor and freshness, hyper palatable formulations, globalized supply chains, celebrity driven advertising, and digital targeting. These firms engage in continuous lobbying to weaken or delay regulations. This is not a food system, it's a commercial model built for scale. Market dominance and profit. Such a system cannot support public health. India's UPF consumption is rising at an alarming pace. Retail sales grew from $0.9 billion in 2006 to $38 billion in 2019, nearly a 40-fold increase. Products have penetrated urban, peri-urban, and increasingly rural diets. So children and adolescents are especially targeted through ineffective regulations. UPFs do not supplement but displaces traditional diets. India's health indicators reflects the consequences. Obesity has doubled over the past decade. Type 2 diabetes affects 1 in 10 adults. Childhood obesity continues to rise, and young people aged 5 to 19 are already showing metabolic abnormalities. Yet India still lacks national surveillance of UPF consumption, allowing the crisis to grow unseen. to grow unseen. The industry and policy making, India's India scenario illustrates the dynamic Lancet warns against the examples are troubling and persistent. Front of pack labeling. Stakeholder consultations were dominated by industry. 80% of invited stakeholders were food manufacturers. Advertising Standards of Council of India, a self-regulatory body comprising manufacturers, is responsible for monitoring food advertising norms. FSSAI routinely organizes stakeholders consultations where industry actors or their proxies are present as partners in food and nutrition governance. So these actors create doubt, dispute definitions, challenge standards set by India's nutrition science institutions, and offer to co-develop guidelines. This is not public consultation. It is corporate political activity that mirrors decades of tactics used by the tobacco industry. So the result speaks for themselves. Between September 2023 and March 2025, India did not identify a single misleading food advertisements for official reports. This defies everyday experience and illustrates how self-regulations fail. India's food policy challenges cannot be solved through nutrient thresholds, star rating, or behavior change campaigns alone. These are downstream tools. The real battle is for who controls India's food policy. And at present, that space is increasingly used by the very corporations whose products drive the problem of NCDs. Unless India disrupts this paradigm, no amount of consumer education will meaningfully reduce UPF consumption. Last week, new restrictions across UK stopped HFSS food and drinks from being advertised on TV before 9 p.m. and at any time online to tackle its obesity crisis. Almost 10% children live with obesity in UK, while 1 in 5 has both decay by age 5. 1 in 5 has tooth decay by age 5. India's regulatory framework remains weak and requires urgent attention in order to achieve what was promised in 2017. Mandatory warning labels on high salt, high sugar, high fat products, now pending for over a decade. The Lancet's experts argue for legal definitions of UPFs and HFSS harmonized by ICMR MIN guidelines and UPF HFSS free zones in public institutions such as schools, hospitals, Anganwadis, and government canteens, and taxation on UPF HFSS to generate revenue that may be used for subsidy of health foods. Industry doesn't like these interventions, but these measures are not anti-industry activities. They are pro-child, pro-consumer, pro-farmer, pro-health. They restore the centrality of real whole food in India's diet. So India needs a bold shift anchored in evidence. The priority clear. Protect policy making from commercial influence. A concrete step that can enable quick regulatory actions is to remove industry influence from the food and nutrition policy making. So stakeholders consultations should be divided into two distinct processes: expert consultations for regulation and industry consultation for implementation and administrative actions. SSCI must have no role to monitor food marketing and advertisements as a long-term and sustainable solutions. So India would also require to put in place a policy to prevent conflicts of interest in line with Article 5.3 of FCTC, WHO's framework Convention on Tobacco Control. India is at the stage of UPF expansion that Lancet warns about globally. But the question is simple: safeguard our people's health or safeguard corporate profit? So this is all about the Big Food decides what you eat. Thank you very much.